This is homework help for Chapter 1, Homework 1 for Math 107. So I'll explain a little bit about what is required in these homeworks. You see right here, on these cases, you have write the formula. Where's my pen? Okay, write the formulas. Write the formulas, and that means to write them in the most general way that you can, with X's and Y's and Z's and D's or whatever you need to write them with. After that, do the actual problem. This is good practice for the future. Anyone going into engineering or physics, you start off by writing down the formulas you're going to use, and then you fill in the numbers. You don't just immediately go to the answer. That actually doesn't buy you very much. So let's look at what is the formula for the distance between 2 points. In order to write this formula, I have to do the following. I have to identify 2 points. Now, if you're not used to this terminology, here's what we do. Say P is for point. Now, if I want the first point, I put a subscript for 1. The second point, I put a subscript for 2. Subscripts in math are generally just counters. They tell you what's the first one, second one, third one, whatever. The superscript, like x squared, you know what that means. That's x times x. So that has mathematical meaning or arithmetic meaning. Here, the subscripts just mean the first one and the second one. Now the next issue is you see the points are identified with this. Those are called ordered pairs. In an ordered pair, the x is first and then the y. That's important to remember. So point 1 has coordinates x1, y1. And point 2 has coordinates x2, y2. Okay, so I'm going to erase a little bit of this so we have some room to write the formula. In order to make this video not entirely too long, I'm going to now go to the formula. I explain it in another video on the lecture, and I also explain it in class. So the distance between 2 points, we'll use D for distance, is the square root of the difference in the x's, that will be x1 minus x2, that's the difference, squared, plus the difference in the y squared. So you should write that formula down. Now you're going to substitute from the points values that were given up here. Remember that if you subtract a negative, that turns into a positive. And there's also a video for this class that I use all along to help you learn how to add and subtract negative numbers if you have a problem with that. So there's my formula for distance. Now what is the formula for midpoint? I'm going to erase this top up here so I'm writing things in the wrong place. Alright. Midpoint means it's a point. That means it has an x value and a y value. If you add two numbers just by themselves and you said what's the midpoint, that would be the average. So I'm going to write for the midpoint, I'll do a bar. You could write something else, but that usually means average. You add them together and divide by 2. There's a more complicated way of looking at it, but this is essentially how it's done. In other words, you could look at the distance between x1 and x2, cut that in half, and add it to the first point. When you did some algebra, you would end up with this formula. So, same thing here. At this point, you should be able to do 1 and 2. If you have problems or questions on the negative numbers, you might check out that other video. So here's problem 3 of this homework set, and you're given an equation for a line, and then you have to tell some things about the slope, right? There's several ways to identify a line. One is what's called the standard way, and in the standard way you would have some number, like let's say ax plus by equals another number I'll call c. Right. There's another way of expressing a line, which is what you're given here, and that's y equals mx plus b. Right. What does m mean? That is the slope. It's a universal letter in math for slope. It's m. And b is the y-intercept. It's where this line would run into the y-axis. So when you have the equation in this form, all you have to do is read off the slope, because the number that's preceding the x when you're in this form is the slope. If you have this form, you have to rearrange so you have y isolated, and then whatever is multiplying x is the slope. So now we have a slope for this one, and now having found the slope, what is parallel slope? parallel lines, I can draw some lines here for you. So if you have two lines that are parallel, like railroad tracks, obviously they have the same slope. Parallel lines have the same slope. Perpendicular lines, though, that's a little different. So I'll look at perpendicular lines for a minute. Say these lines are perpendicular. Well, this one is going up, sort of in my general way of drawing here, so that has a positive slope. But if it's perpendicular, it has to go the other direction, so it's negative. So that's the first part of trying to find a perpendicular slope from a line. So it's the perpendicular slope is the negative. That means you change the sign. Reciprocal. Okay. So if I have something like this, negative 25, say that was the slope. The parallel slope would also be negative 25, and the perpendicular slope, it's going to be the negative of that, which means it's positive, and reciprocal means flip the fraction over. This obviously is 25 over 1, so it's 1/25. So I've erased that, but the operative words to remember are that the perpendicular slope is the negative reciprocal. That's two things you have to do. Change its sign and flip it over. Okay, let's look at 4, 5, and 6. 4, 5, and 6 have to do with what's called function evaluation. Remember, if you have something that is an equation, let's just say it's 2x plus 9x squared, fine, and this is a function, you can replace the y with another name, f of x or g of x or h of x. You get to pick that letter. Okay, f is typically used. So when the equation is a function, it has two names, y and f of x. The benefit of f of x is that you store here the value you want to place, use for the x's. So if I say f of 0, that means every place there's an x, I stick a 0. It saves writing a lot of words. So in this case, f of 0 means that in this expression, every place there's an x, there's one here, and there's one down here, you replace that with 0, and then you do the rest of the arithmetic. In this case, you will replace all the x's with 4, and in this case, you replace all the x's with -1. I'm going to make a comment about that now. For this -1, well, this is the problem here. I'm sorry I erased the problem. Oh well. Okay. When f, you're saying evaluate f at -1. So every place there's an x, I'm going to put a -1. If it's a negative number, you have to put it in parentheses. In that case, this is a term that's going to give you problems. So it's 3 times a -1 squared. You see, this is 3 times x up here, so it becomes 3 times a -1. Now, when you square a number, the square, the scope of it, is the number right next to it or the parentheses right next to it. -2 squared means -2 times -2, which is a +1. Or, I'm sorry, -1 times -1, which is +1. If the negative sign is here, the 2 only pertains to the 1, so this is a negative. Multiplying 1 times 1, this is going to be a -1. Try to clarify the distinction to that in your mind. I'll give you another example. Okay, I've got -3 squared. That means -3 times -3, which is a +9. If there's no parentheses, that means just square the 3. That answer is -9. So be a little careful with that -1 there.